Imagine a revolution where the loudest voices weren't carrying muskets but spinning wheels. A rebellion powered not just by patriots in powdered wigs, but by women who didn't even have the legal right to vote. Yet quietly, almost invisibly, they helped bring an empire to its knees. Today, we uncover the story you were never told about the American Revolution. Because behind every protest, every boycott, every radical spark of defiance, there were women in kitchens, markets, fields, and workshops doing something far more dangerous than it sounds. They refused to obey. The British Parliament feared them. The colonial leaders depended on them. In history textbooks, they barely mention them. These were the daughters of liberty, and without them, 1776 might never have happened. Sounds dramatic? Oh, you have no idea. Let's begin. It's the early 1760s. The American colonies are booming, full of ambition, trade, and political gossip. But Britain? Britain is broke after the 7 Years' War. And when empires go broke, they do what governments still do today. They start taxing people. Enter the Stamp Act of 1765, taxing newspapers, legal papers, even playing cards. Colonists explode with anger, shouting the legendary phrase, "No taxation without representation." But here's the plot twist. Most colonial women couldn't vote or hold office, and yet they were still expected to pay these taxes. Imagine being told you have no political voice, yet you still have to fund the empire ruling you. Women weren't just observers, they were victims of these laws. And when the Sons of Liberty started protesting in the streets, women were asking their own question. If we can't fight on the battlefield, how do we fight back? Spoiler alert, they found a way, and it was brilliant. So brilliant that British officials called it economic warfare. The Daughters of Liberty wasn't a formal organization with membership cards. It was a movement, organic, growing, unstoppable. When Parliament passed the Townshend Acts in 1767, taxing tea, glass, paper, and lead, colonial men began talking boycotts. But boycotts need replacements, and who provided them? Women. Hundreds of women met in what colonists called spinning bees, turning raw wool into handmade cloth. Picture it. Big community gatherings where instead of gossip, they exchanged revolutionary strategies. Their message? If Britain wants to tax imported fabric, then we'll make our own. Housewives became economic warriors. Teen girls turned into political influencers before the term existed. Homes became factories of resistance. Newspapers praised these women as heroes, and British merchants panicked as their exports dropped. Colonial unity wasn't built in taverns. It was threaded into cloth by women across New England. Let's bust a myth. The Boston Tea Party wasn't just angry men dumping crates into the harbor. The groundwork was laid by women who refused to buy or drink. British tea years before 1773. When Parliament taxed tea in 1767, colonial women launched what newspapers called the Great Tea Refusal. And trust me, this wasn't just skipping your morning caffeine. Tea back then was a symbol of class, refinement, and British culture. Rejecting it was basically saying, we reject the empire itself. Women burned tea leaves. They brewed Liberty tea from raspberry leaves, mint, sage, you name it. Every sip became rebellion. British observers mocked them, calling it silly female theatrics. But when the taxes failed to bring revenue, Parliament stopped laughing. Women turned a household habit into a political weapon. It was peaceful, subtle, and incredibly effective. And it set the stage for the dramatic protests that followed. By the early 1770s, women weren't just avoiding British goods, they were replacing them entirely. They spun cloth, brewed herbal teas, made candles, raised livestock, and ran businesses in their husband's absence. Women enforced the boycott socially. If a merchant refused to join the boycott, good luck getting customers. Women controlled the marketplace. If a neighbor bought smuggled British tea, expect a cold social freeze worse than anything on Instagram today. Some towns wrote public lists naming women who stayed loyal to the boycott, early call-out culture. British officials wrote home, saying they feared the fury of the women more than militia mobs. And honestly, they had a point. Women weren't violent, but they were relentless. Their economic pressure starved. British imports and forced political leaders to take action. Many historians today argue the revolution's economic resistance would have collapsed without women. And the best part? They did it all without voting, without formal power, and without recognition. Until now, let's talk names. Real women, real impact. Mercy Otis Warren, a playwright who mocked British officials so brutally that even some patriots winced. Her plays shaped public opinion like viral YouTube videos do today. Esther Reed organized one of the largest fundraising campaigns of the Revolution. She wrote The Sentiments of an American Woman, a fiery declaration that went viral across the colonies. She and thousands of women raised money, sewed clothing, and supplied the army. Deborah Sampson literally disguised herself as a man and fought in the Continental Army. She didn't get discovered for nearly 2 years. And yes, she survived gunshot wounds without medical help to avoid detection. These women weren't background characters, they were protagonists. When war finally erupted in 1775, everything changed overnight. Men marched to the front lines. Women ran farms, shops, workshops, and even family finances. They became blacksmiths, butchers, teachers, and managers. If the home front fell apart, the war would collapse. And these women kept everything running, quietly, uncelebrated. They hid weapons, carried messages, and acted as spies. Some confronted British soldiers directly when their homes were raided. Talk about bravery. Imagine standing between armed redcoats and your children. Many women starved, lost homes, or became refugees. Yet they didn't give up. Their resilience kept communities alive. George Washington himself praised them, saying the Army's survival depended on civilian support. And civilians were mostly women. So what did all this resistance achieve? First, it crippled British trade. Boycotts caused British merchants to pressure Parliament to repeal taxes. Second, it unified the colonies. You want solidarity? Try thousands of women sewing the same homespun cloth. Third, it laid the foundation for the idea that ordinary people, not elites, could fight an empire. Their work normalized resistance as part of everyday life. Fourth, it changed political culture. The idea that women could engage in political action, non-violent but powerful, was revolutionary. They didn't just support the revolution, they shaped its identity. Without their economic power, morale, and community leadership, 1776 might have been a failed experiment. The story of the Daughters of Liberty reminds us that revolutions aren't only won with battles. They're won in kitchens, marketplaces, workshops, and homes. They're won by ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Today, we often imagine the revolution as a men-only drama, Washington, Jefferson, Adams. But the truth is far richer, more diverse, more inspiring. These women didn't shout for fame. They didn't seek statues. They simply refused to obey injustice. And ironically, that quiet defiance became one of the loudest forces in American history. So here's the final question I'll leave with you. If the Daughters of Liberty helped build a nation without ever being given credit, how many other untold stories still shape our world today? Let me know your thoughts in the comments and tell me if you want a part 2.